This is Anne Marie, the anti-HR lady, and this is my first YouTube chat on my channel. And so I'm very excited about it. And I wanted to be very intentional about who I chose to talk to the first time I did a video on my channel and what I chose to talk about. And so today I'm talking to two of my favorite people, two people I've never met in real life, but I feel like I know because I love them so much and I follow them on social media. I've met both of them through LinkedIn and now follow them religiously on TikTok as well. And I think they were the best people for me to talk to about the subject today, which is why is diversity, equity, and inclusion failing Black women? And I wanted to talk about why DEI is not working the way that it should for Black women specifically, but for generally people of color, and what we can do to solve that and to make it work better for all of us and for everyone. So today I am talking to, and I want to make sure I get their information up in front of me because I don't want to get it wrong, because these are two women who know their stuff and you need to know who they are. So we're talking to Deja Joab Brewster. And she is a DEI expert. She specializes specifically in the military and mental health space. And she's also worked across several spectrums in multiple countries. And she's married to an active duty sailor and has 3 children. Deja, thank you for being here. Deja is on TikTok as, tell me who your name is because you changed it.
I did. It's Slytherin Snakelet right now. It's my Harry Potter one.
Okay, write that down, y'all, because I'm not going to remember. And we're also talking to Tammy Triolo today. Tammy is the CEO and founder of PCQ Consulting. Tammy heads a boutique agency that specializes in company culture and diversity, equity, and inclusion. She is a sought-after speaker and collaborator, and she has spent most of her career in healthcare and in the field. She's mastered being an empathetic leader. Tammy leads a program called Unleashing Empathy. If you have not heard of it, go look it up. If you are interested in that subject, you need to get into her classes as quickly as possible. She is a person who really advocates for helping people figure out how they can be more empathetic. And by people, I mean white people, but all of us, about how we can unleash empathy to be better people, better managers, better supervisors, better workers. And so I'm really excited to have both of them here. Thank you, ladies, for being here.
Thank you.
And I'm going to ask both of you, and me, who am I? I'm Anne-Marie.
Yeah, I was about to say, you didn't introduce yourself, Anne.
I'm Anne-Marie Archer. I'm the anti-HR lady. I'm a recovering attorney who is now an HR consultant. I spent 20 plus years working in the HR and operations space, overseeing HR, building HR programs and operation structures. And I decided to chuck it all and set myself free from all of it and move to Mexico, which is where I now live and where I help my clients exit on their own terms from discriminatory, hostile work environments. So if that's of interest to you, please make sure you subscribe to my channel, follow me on social media as the anti-HR lady, and reach out to me if you think that you need services that I provide. I will be launching a group masterclass on how to exit a discriminatory, hostile work environment with your coin without having to hire a lawyer. So if you're interested in that subject, you want to leave and you want to know how to make them pay you to leave, make sure you enroll, subscribe to my website, get on the wait list, which will open very soon, and take advantage of the early bird registration. Now, let's get to the subject at hand, which is why is diversity, equity, inclusion failing Black women? And my first question, and I'm going to pose it to Tammy first, is diversity, equity, and inclusion failing Black women, right? Do you think it is? And if so, tell me why.
It absolutely is failing Black women. And I think it's failing Black women the most because we tend to be the people that get these jobs or get these roles. It's not that other groups don't get these roles, but Black women doggedly pursue diversity, equity, and inclusion positions. And when we do pursue them, we do get them. And I think the reason why it's failing us is because the system was never really designed within corporations with us in mind, right? So it's the same thing like when this country was built, it wasn't built on the premise that Black people would actually be free.
Right.
So it's not adjusting to us being free. And so diversity, equity, and inclusion, although it came out of the civil rights era, as we know, with all things with racism, it doesn't go away, just evolves. It mutates into something else. So anything that the system tries to put in place to correct in discrimination and bias, the system will find a way to maneuver around it. And so we get pulled in thinking we're going in there to do some things, and we realize that we're just there to kind of be the stopgap, and a lot of times the scapegoat for when things go wrong. And I think it's failing Black women in that way the most, because Black women are the ones who are being burnt out in diversity, equity, inclusion, being gaslit in diversity, equity, inclusion, and being ran out. Right now, I think the statistics, I've shared this so many times on social media, it's 81% white, and that is by design, and 3.5% Black. And out of those 3.5% Black, although it's mostly Black women, we're the ones suffering the most from mental health issues in regards to the work that we're doing in diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Thanks, Tammy. And Deja, same question. In your opinion, is diversity, equity, and inclusion failing Black women? And if yes, why?
I have to wholeheartedly agree with what Tammy said, 1,000% over, especially someone who's experienced it myself and been in that position where I'm like, look, like I see where the issues are. You know, I see where the changes need to happen. I see where the gaps in education are that people that I was working with had. And I wanted to be able to help them understand how to be better people, essentially, how to be more inclusive, what empathy looks like, what diversity actually looks like understanding that it isn't all of us others in a room speaking to one another and telling y'all what we need you to do. You know, it's very much needs to be a collaborative effort, but also the people leading the effort need to be the ones who have always lost the most, which is us. Like in any facet, we've always lost the most. I remember I was watching this TikTok the other day, and it was like this white woman, and she was like, my ancestors from the 1700s asking me what I'm doing, and I'm going to work. And Black women were like, that just didn't land the way that you thought it was going to land, did it? And it's because we've always had the most to lose. You know, we've always had those two things stacked against us, being Black and being a woman. And so it's always working 5 times harder. And when you get in a position like this, you're like, all right, I know what I need to do to change it. And then you have everyone and everything working against you in order to get to that change. And so I would say 1,000%, it's failing us the most. And what it's also doing is it's making us more resentful to corporate America, to these higher powers, to really wanting to even do this work anymore, because we're like, what are we doing it for? Like, where's our piece of the pie that we're still trying to get to, that we're struggling to get to, even, you know, what are we at 3 years into the actual DEI movement now? And we're like, is this needle even moving at this point? And no one sees any type of actual like progression.
I would echo that. In my opinion, I also believe that it's failing Black women, and it's not just failing us from the perspective of those of us who work in that space, but it's also failing employees, right? Because you, as an employee, especially as an employee of color and a Black employee, you see your company touting these programs, right? And they sit it in HR, and I'll get into why that's the worst place for it to be. But they sit it in HR. And so people think this is going to have a transformative impact on the way they not only relate to the company, but also the way they relate to HR. And so when they have problems, especially problems relevant to discrimination, which is how people end up talking to me, a lot of times they say, well, I went and I spoke to the, you know, not just went to HR, but I spoke to the DEI person. And they really think that that was going to make a difference. And it doesn't, because as Tammy said, you know, America right now is in a significant regression. Where it's going to end up, I do not know, but it is in regression. And if the country is in regression, then these programs are also in regression, right? And what people are going to experience in the workplace is only going to get worse from what I can see, because now people feel comfortable saying the quiet things out loud because they don't think there's going to be any accountability. And a lot of times there is not. So it makes you, it's almost a gaslighting on a mass scale, when employers use the DEI program to say, well, you know, we have all these values, and, you know, everyone is included, and this is for, you know, this is to make us all a better workplace. But you as a Black person is like, but it's not making my work experience any better. But then they make you think that you're the problem for raising these things.
Yeah.
Right. And so
Absolutely.
it's like a total mind fuck all the way around, right? For the people who
Mhm.
have to work in it and actually come into it because they want to do things differently and they want to help the organization be better, and they're told that they're being hired to do that. And then they get in there and find that that is absolutely the opposite of what is going to happen and what the intent has been. Because as
Mm-hmm.
Tabby said, it was never intended that we were humans. It was never
Correct.
intended that we were equal. And we still are not, right?
Absolutely.
And there is an intention to ensure that we are never equal to them,
It
right?
definitely is. I
And
get
so
asked.
all of these programs are designed to keep that cycle going.
Absolutely. I got a question on LinkedIn the other day, and somebody said, I really enjoy your content, but I want to know why you're so focused on race, like DEI, and this is the biggest gaslight for people in the DEI space. Well, it's not just about race; it's about all these other things. And I said the reason why I focus on race because in every marginalization, Black exists.
Mm-hmm.
Black bodies exist in gay. Black bodies exist in trans. Black bodies exist in disability, in religion, age, all the things. And in every instance, when you think about DEI, the person, the Black body, and whatever body it comes in, is always going to fare worse.
Yes.
A white gay person in an organization is going to have a far different experience than a Black gay person in an organization. A white disabled person is going to have a better experience than a Black disabled person, or even a brown disabled person. So yes, I am hyper focused on race because race is in all these other marginalizations. And when we talk about these other marginalization, Black people always fare worse.
And not only that, the foundation of discrimination in the United States is anti-Blackness.
Correct.
Everything else grows out of that. And every right and the inverse of that is every step of progress that has been made because Black people fought to make it happen. Black people,
Absolutely.
Black Americans specifically fought to make it happen. And so we cannot try to allow ourselves to be erased from that. And we cannot allow people to say, oh, it's not just about race. No, well, yes, it is what I would used to say in my former work. Yes, in fact, it is. And if you're afraid to face and grapple with that reality, especially in the United States of America, you cannot have a real conversation about DEI. If you're not willing to talk about the foundation of anti-Black racism in the United States and the fact that that's what makes it possible to discriminate against everyone else. Because first they come for them, then they come for you. Because if it's okay for them to discriminate on the basis of race, then it's okay for them to discriminate against you for everything else. Right. Correct. And people don't want to see that, because the other inverse of that is you can actually be, disabled, gay, and racist.
Yes, exactly.
Right? And so because your whiteness is what protects you in American society. Right. And so the inverse of that is true. And I'm wondering for both of you if in your work you've seen this, but I've had people come to me and actually say, Black women, that in fact, the DEI programs and the DEI policies are now being used against Black people. And they're being accused of reverse racism and not being inclusive and all these kinds of buzzwords. Yeah. Right. So when you talk about gaslighting, right. Yeah. Instead of using these programs to support people of color, instead it's being used as a weapon to maintain the status quo.
I'm gonna let Joy speak, and then I want to talk after Joy. But Joy, answer that, and then I'll go next.
So, like in my area where I work very much in the military community, this has been something that is just like everywhere. And I tell people this all the time. They're like, "Oh, well, they're a veteran, they're this, they're that," and they serve right next to Black people. That's their brother, that's their sister, and I'm like, but once that uniform comes off, that is another Black person. I was like, even when I was with that uniform on, it's still another Black person. I'm like, do you understand how much people of color and Black people in the military have been discriminated against even now? Like, do you understand what that looks like? I'm like, there are people who still do not have their benefits because of the color of their skin to this day. And I've noticed that they're starting these DEI programs and they're trying to stand up all these different things and different commands. And the military is like, a lot of people that are in command are white people. And so they go in there and they're trying to have these other people come in and change things. And they are firing people from these positions because they're talking about race. And I have people who will comment on my LinkedIn, who will comment on my TikTok, tell me all these things about what's happening for them in their command. And they'll say, I got outed, I got reprimanded, I got demoted, I got this, I got that, because I was talking about race and they told me that I was racist. And I was like, that's because they're trying to maintain something that has been the military culture and has been that way since the dawn of time. I was like, the military is the largest social experiment we have in America, and they don't always get it right. But everyone also likes to say that it's not a social experiment, so they try and like reverse it and say, no, that's not what the military is. And so when you take it from that perspective of looking at it and saying, okay, well, now we're using it against these individuals that are Black, brown, whatever it might be, immigrants. Like, you look at anti-Blackness and you look at it as a global phenomenon, really is what it is. Yeah. And you try and look at it from that perspective also of, you have people who are like myself, West Indian, and they have anti-Blackness, and like, where is that coming from? And it literally all stems from what is being taught in America and then what's being shipped overseas in different ways. And so it's really a lot of, how do we keep these people from getting any sense of self and dignity, and how do we maintain this area of making them feel lesser than?
Yeah. What's funny is I'm seeing a lot of Black people in DEI space internalize racism for themselves.
Yeah.
In that I've heard Black people say to me, I've had Black people on LinkedIn say to me, well, it's not just about race. And the only thing that I can come to that is, I think for as much as Black people are exhausted by this conversation, and some of us are exhausted by it, and I think the coping mechanism for some of us is to just kind of surrender to it, right? And so it's almost like, if you can't beat the system, just join into it, right? And how do I seem the most palatable to the people who I know is not going to change anything? So how do I just maintain my job? How do I just maintain a livelihood? How do I just maintain? And part of that is then taking Black people and using Black people to gaslight other Black people and say to us, we need to stop talking about race. It's not just about race. And when I used to first see this thing happening, it used to get me so angry. And y'all know me, I used to go in on LinkedIn. And then I realized what was happening. And it's really just a symptom of exhaustion for Black people. And so Black people retreat. But the way they retreat can sometimes be harmful to other Black people. It's very one thing if you want to retreat into yourself and say, you know what, I give up and I just accept it. It's another thing when you start using your voice to start speaking the language of the oppressor, to start saying to Black people that it's not just about race, that this is not the biggest deal. It's not the biggest issue, because like Ann says, it doesn't just impact the practitioners, those of us who work in it, but it also impacts those employees. And so when those employees go into that Black person who they don't know has given up and just kind of retreated, then that Black employee is gaslighting Black employees.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things I'm sorry, Joelle, go ahead.
I said it's like a form of Stockholm syndrome, essentially. Yes. Literally what it sounds like.
Because we can't talk about this without talking about how the practice of DEI has very much shown up, how so many of its practitioners who are people of color, because it's not just the Black people who are practicing this, engage in, the desire for the white gaze, white proximity, right? And the realization that to get ahead, if you will be more successful if you do the DEI the way they want it. So you might come in there and know that this is the way it should be done, but then it's clearly messaged to you that they don't want it done that way. And so then not only do you change your approach, then you start doing what Tammy just talked about, which you're engaging in gaslighting of your own people. Yep. When they come to you with problems, you're weaponizing yourself. You're allowing yourself to be used as a weapon against your own people.
And we see that a lot. I think
and it's a lot. In corporate DEI, you'll see it a lot. And so I always give DEI people, in corporate positions the side eye, because I'm like, especially when they've been in there for a long time.
I'm
like, you can't possibly be doing your job well if you've been in here for 10 years.
Absolutely not. People
you are maintaining the status quo. If you have been doing this in this organization for 10 years, and when, I always tell people, if you want to know what a DEI program is really about and whether it's valued, you look at its budget, and you look at where it reports to, right?
Yep.
And I'm like, and you see the numbers. You want to look at the recruitment, you want to look at the retention, which is even more than the recruitment, but you want to know what kind of money are they spending, because these usually have the smallest budget, right?
Yep.
And
Or
they
no
usually
budget
report to HR, which is not where you ever want DEI. Should never report to HR if you intend for it to be effective, right? Or no budget, as Tammy said. And whether there's any staff, usually maybe it's one person and an assistant, right?
Yeah.
So you've been in there for 10 years with one assistant reporting to the HR manager, and you think that I should be impressed with you? I know right away that you're not doing anything to support people of color in your organization. Otherwise, you wouldn't still be there. And you
You're a
wouldn't still
second
be
arm
there
of HR.
with one, you're just an arm of enforcement, right, of the status quo. And so you're not there to do it, to make any changes, which is why you're still there.
Yeah,
right?
and they water everything down.
Yeah, because there's a lot of turnover in DEI. And the reason there's so much turnover of people of color is because people get disenchanted, because they come in there and they want to do a good job and they realize that they can't. So then they leave and they go somewhere else thinking it's going to be different. And then they find the same thing, right? And so that's why there's so much turnover of, I think, people of color, especially Black people in these roles. While, of course, you have white people as a majority doing the programs. To me, that's the same as the fox in charge of the hen house. How are you going to put the fox in charge of the hen house? Because if you really want to protect the hens, you don't put the fox to watch the hen house, right?
But the other foxes got to be protected. And so they're protecting the other foxes.
Exactly. You know, it's like I said, that the country was never built with Black people being free. And so the systems are never going to be built with us being free, ever.
Not
ever.
With the intention of us being free.
No, it never will. And that's why I said racism just mutates into something else. It evolves
is what I always call it.
Evolving itself into something else. And if you're not paying attention, and I'm always paying attention, which is why we're all friends and connected. We're always paying attention. If you're paying attention, you see the way that it mutates itself into something else, right? And it's funny because I was saying to Vonda, when we started doing the Unleash Empathy Masterclass, I want to say we've been doing it since last year, right? We were just kind of like doing them free, right? Like we weren't charging anybody. If you wanted to come into the class, you can come into the class, and we was talking. And it wasn't Unleash Empathy, it was unpacking your anti-Blackness. And that came out, what came out of the mentorship was, I realized that the people that we were trying to help, Black and white people, fundamentally didn't have empathy. And it wasn't until Vonda asked me this one question, and she said, why do you think in DEI things haven't changed? And I said, because the people that can give us the change don't have empathy for us. They don't have empathy for us, because empathy makes you want to change it, fix it, and do something for the person. They sympathize with us, and that sympathy is, oh, I feel bad, but oof, I'm glad it's not me.
There you go.
The empathy is, I feel bad, and I imagine that could be me. What can I do to change it?
Change it.
And I said, that's why nothing has changed in DEI, because the people in charge of giving us, paying us what we are worth, don't have the empathy for our plight, our situations. They don't care that they're single moms who rely on a raise that is equitable to the white woman working next to her. They don't care. They don't have empathy for it. And so because they don't have empathy for it, they don't make any change for us. And then I was like, and that's what we need to be talking about. We need to be talking about the empathy that is devoid inside of whiteness.
And
that allows them to do it.
And I think you're right about that, because, you know, I just got back from Africa, 5 weeks in Africa. And the first stop on my trip was Senegal. And I think it was the second day that I was there, I went to Gorée Island. And Gorée Island was the largest port in the transatlantic slave trade. More people were stolen and sent through that passageway than anywhere else. And as I was there, and I mean, this is the second time I've been to one of these places. I've also been to Cape Coast Castle in Ghana, and it's probably the last time I'm going to go to one of those places. But what always struck me was that the people who were the enslavers, right, the human traffickers, were living right above where the enslaved people were, right? So they were eating, they were drinking, in Cape Coast, the church was right above one of the dungeons. They were worshiping above people, human beings that they had in dark dungeons that they were getting ready to sell, right? And I had to ask myself, like, it's the depth of the evil for me that always baffles me. And that the only way you could do that on a systematic basis is if you had no empathy.
None.
And I feel like empathy has been over time erased, because in order to believe that you have a right to treat other people in the way that Black Americans and other indigenous people all across the world have been treated everywhere that Europeans have landed, you have to kill your empathy. You have to kill your empathy. Yeah. You can't do it if you have empathy.
You can't do
it.
Over
time, don't have it now.
Over time, it's removed. And so I think what Tammy said is very true, that there might be sympathy, but the sympathy is even from the perspective of, I'm glad it ain't me.
It ain't
Carry
me.
on, right?
Yeah.
It's not, this is horrible and I need to do something. And it's like, I need to do something as long as it doesn't inconvenience me in any way. Oh, you mean that I'm going to have to give something up in order for you to have something? Oh, well, then we're not doing that.
We're not doing that.
We're not doing that.
It's
right?
Empathy deficit.
That's what
we're
it
at
is.
An empathy deficit.
Because Absolutely. It's like, how in the world could you do these things, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you had empathy, you couldn't.
You couldn't. There's no way you could. Your conscience, your heart, your spirit wouldn't allow you to do it. When you have empathy, people, it just wouldn't allow you to do it. And I've talked about this on LinkedIn. You guys know I talk about it on TikTok, and I talk about the epigenetics of it all, right? Mm-hmm. We have to talk about the epigenetics of it all. And one of the things that kind of brought me to that conclusion, I was watching an experiment that they'd done on mice. And they had this male mice, and they basically would put cherry blossom to this male mice. And every time they would put the cherry blossom, they would shock the mice. And they did that over time. And then they took that mice's sperm and impregnated other mice with it. And every child that mice created had an aversion to cherry blossoms because the trauma from their father was coded on that DNA. And so I always say, if Black people, and we know Dr. DeGrow has done this on YouTube, and if you don't follow her, you should be watching all of her lectures. And she talks about post-traumatic slave syndrome, which is just epigenetics of it all, right? So I said to Vonda, I said, this is so funny. I said, because we pathologize Black people and trauma all the time. We don't pathologize whiteness. And I'm here to pathologize whiteness for people. I said, because slavery, we were in that thing together. Black and white people, we were in this thing together. So if I, as a Black person, come out of slavery with trauma, what does white people come out of slavery with? Violence.
Yeah.
So that same thing that's marked on our DNA, that epigenetics that's marked on our DNA, that says the trauma we carry, what they carry on their DNA is that inherent violence. And the thing that makes them be able to do violence, enact violence, is that deep-rooted lack of empathy. It's removed from them. And when you don't have empathy, you can enact violence on people. You can discriminate against people. You can kill them. You can rob them. You can do all these things to them because you have no empathy for them as people. And so they don't have empathy, which allows them to continue to enact violence, psychological violence, emotional violence, physical violence, socioeconomic violence. It allows them to enact it because they're devoid of the empathy that's needed to not behave in that way.
I think a lot of them are also devoid of sympathy, honestly. I would say both. Because at what point do people keep saying, oh, well, how they're talking about Christopher Columbus and related to indigenous people, and they literally just, they still don't care. It's not even like, oh, well, it wasn't affecting me, so it's not a big deal. They still don't care. There's some people that, like, I was having this conversation with someone one time, and I was like, well, I guess it's different when your body's currency, isn't it? And they just didn't understand. So I'm like, it makes me wonder, like, I think some people are devoid of both empathy and sympathy because they literally don't feel anything for anyone that is other than them. They don't feel for indigenous people. They don't feel for Black people. They don't feel for people that have been historically, like, obliterated, and they don't care. And even when you give them the evidence, they still are like, oh, well, that's their problem. Oh, well, they should have thought harder. Oh, that's something that happened X amount of years ago. Why are we still talking about it? Like when you keep looking at things like, Ruby Bridges, and people are talking about how they don't want CRT taught in schools, and you're like, Ruby Bridges is still alive. She has an Instagram. Like, and you're telling me that because you don't want what your grandma did taught to these children, even though she had to live through it, where's your sympathy there? And they don't have any. So I really think it's both for some people. I really do. And even from my psychological teachings that I've been in, I mean, I have 2 masters in psych, and I've looked at criminalistics and all of those things. A lot of times too, they're the frontal lobe and all of that stuff, and looking at how people are devoid of just emotion, period. And you look at how that's been evolved as well. And I think that when you look at both empathy and sympathy in a matter of how people care for other individuals, I think it's kind of twofold here with most people.
Well, I also think you can't leave out, and we're going to get to solutions soon, but you can't leave out the role of capitalism in all of this, especially in the United States,
absolutely.
Right? Because this idea of individualism and capitalism, right, and that money at all cost, right, and that's first and foremost. I've always said America is first and foremost a capitalist society more than a democracy, right? And they will sacrifice democracy, and they are doing it in order to maintain white supremacy. But what they will never give up is capitalism, right?
Never.
And so you can't ignore the role of capitalism as well, but that would be a longer conversation for us to have in all of this, right? Because slavery really was a part of a driver of capitalism and making money, right? That's why they were doing it, right? And so you have to understand also that I think the idea of Black people being equal economically is another driver of a lot of this, right?
Yeah.
But I'd like us to talk a little bit now about what is the solution to this for Black people and specifically Black women, not just those of us. I'd like Tammy to talk to the question of those working in the space. And I'd love Joie to talk to the question of those working with the space as a person who has done both. Like how do employees navigate DEI is what I'd like you to talk to, Joie, in light of what we just talked about. And Tammy, I'd like you to talk to, what are your recommendations for people who are working in the space, who actually want to do the right thing, right? In the environment that we're in, what can be done to make DEI work better for us?
So I think the first thing people can do if they're working in DEI is the first thing to do is advocate for where your DEI sits. And I actually had a young woman call me because she, her DEI department reports to HR, and, she was like, well, I didn't think about it because that's where every DEI sits. Why should it not sit there? And so we talked about all the reasons why her department doesn't need to be sitting inside of HR, and who ideally should her department report to, and giving her concrete reasons of why this would work differently. So if you're currently working in DEI and your department sits in HR, first thing you need to do is advocate for your department to come out of that space. And a lot of people that go into DEI don't question, don't challenge, don't say, hey, I don't think this is the right place for my department to be, and here are the reasons why. And Black women know all the reasons why. They just have never gone to their CEO or the C-suite and said, here are the reasons why my department should not be reporting here if we want to do DEI and do it effectively. Now, that answer based on your C-suite is going to tell you what your future is going to look like or not look like in that company, right?
Can I throw something out to you though on that?
Sure.
I would also recommend that people ask that question when they're interviewing.
Yeah.
When they're looking for work in the DEI space and it sounds wonderful in the job description and everything, before they even come in person and they talk to the recruiter, they should ask them, where does your DEI sit? Who does it report to? Right?
I think a lot of people do, but I'm talking to the people who need their jobs. Like if ideally myself and Joy, we're kind of doing our own thing, right? And it's some of us have the ability to go out there and we're going to eat or not eat, but we ain't going to play the game, right? Like that's everybody ain't built like us.
No.
Everybody is not Tammy, it's not Ann, it's not Joy, right? So I'm talking to the Black women who know what they're going into, but want to actually impact the change that they want to see. And so if you already know going in, this sits in HR, but you will know all the reasons why it sits in HR. A lot of them don't think to even go and advocate for why it should be removed.
Yeah.
So start having that conversation about why you think your department should be removed out of HR. And every Black woman knows why. Like, I don't have to give them the reasons. Ann doesn't have to give them the reasons. Joy doesn't have. Every Black woman knows why their department shouldn't be there. So once you get into the company, you kind of get the lay of the land, start advocating for having your department moved. And once you have that conversation, right, because a lot of times, in this instance, a young lady that went to her C-suite, she actually got her department moved. She actually made the argument and got it moved. And now she reports directly to the CEO. Excellent. And that was not something she thought that was possible, right? Because she never imagined she could even do it. So that would be the first thing I would say is start talking to your C-suite, to your CEOs, advocating for why your department should not be underneath HR, and then really build out a program that involves education. Because another thing that I believe that is missing in DEI and why white folks particularly don't really understand the importance of it is because the education about the history of this country, about the history of race, has never been honestly taught. And I said, so you need to make DEI more of a company. You're going to have to be the history teacher for DEI. And a lot of people don't see themselves in that role, but that is critical.
Yeah.
Because you have to tell the truth about why race is the way it is, why inequity exists. And so we do all of this performative initiatives about, we're going to do some training about bias. We're going to do some training about collaboration. We're going to do some training about all these things. And then you wonder why you're still having a hard time getting people to buy in to why they need to start taking names of applications that create the bias that keep people out. So your DEI program, if it's not really rooted and centered on real history of race in this country, you're always going to be pushing the rock against the hill trying to do DEI. And it's getting people to have honest conversation about race, about gender, and how these things intersect. So if you are working in DEI, that's one of the first things I'm going to tell you to do. Advocate to have your DEI removed. And part of your program should be history, teaching history in your organization, teaching history to your leaders and your managers and employees, right? When people know somebody else's story accurately, they can start empathizing with that story. But a lot of people that push against race, CRT and everything else, they don't know history. Right?
Yep.
They only know the
that's
history
the whole
that people
point
gave
is
them.
to keep people ignorant. That's literally
Keep
the
them
whole
ignorant.
point.
And if you're a DEI director and that's not your first goal, is to eradicate some of the ignorance around race in this country, I don't care whatever else you're doing in DEI, you're doing it wrong.
Yep.
Yeah. So Joie, for you, from the employee perspective, what are things that employees can do to make DEI work better for them?
I think one is knowing who in your organization is going to be your person to go to. I think that is an important part of knowing like who is actually going to have your back. Because I think that, like in my case, I thought HR was going to have my back. That wasn't what the case was. I thought that someone that was my superior was going to have my back, and that's not exactly what the case was. I think it's really understanding who in the organization actually has your back is important, but also having good mentors. I think one of the biggest things that really helped me to, one, be a good employee, two, do my job well, three, be that person in a lonely place as a DEI person, but still like want to continue doing the work, was having those good mentors, having people to talk to, having individuals that I can go to and say, hey, this is what's going on. Can you just give me some type of advice so that I know what I'm doing is right? Document everything. Like, I keep a running Google Doc on your personal email of anything that has happened, with the date, the time, follow up with emails, make sure that whatever was said is always in the document, and then ask, did I get everything correct? Because at that point, if they are like, yep, you got it, then you are making a paper trail for yourself. Always CYA. Like, at the end of the day, no matter where you are, you need to CYA, because something is going to happen. And I hate to say it this way, but that's the way it is. Something's going to happen. You're going to get quiet fired, even though I hate that term. Like something's going to happen where they're going to try and push you out. Keep your documents up to date. Follow up and say, oh, I saw that you removed me from this meeting. Can you explain to me why I was removed when I've been in these meetings for the last month and a half? Oh, I know that I got this on my performance review. I just wanted to make sure that I got it correct. Follow up. Have those good mentors. And also, like, if something looks off to you, it's off. Don't question yourself. I did that a lot, where I questioned myself and I was like, maybe I'm crazy. Sis, you're not crazy. Bro, you're not crazy. Like, what you see is exactly what's happening. And I think a lot of times that we try and like psych ourselves out because, one, we need a job or we need the money or whatever it is. But two, we're like, oh, we don't want to come off as calling someone racist. No, call them racist if they're racist. Call them sexist if they're sexist. Point out what's going on, because you pointing out their bad behavior is not a bad look on you. And so I think from the employee perspective, we need to have more confidence in ourselves and knowing what's going on, and also having people that is going to be outside of the organization to go to and say, this is what I'm experiencing. How can I make this better for myself? Or what do you suggest I do? And then also covering our own asses every time.
And I would add to that, from the employee's perspective, is that it is critically important for employees to understand from the first day that their best advocate is themselves.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And that the only person that's going to have their back at work is them.
Yep.
This belief that human resources is going to protect you is a fallacy. And I really need for people to understand that human resources responsibility is to look out for the organization and to protect the organization from the employees. It is not there to protect you, and it is not going to. If there is a DEI person in HR, going to them and sharing all your documentation and naming names is the worst thing that you can possibly do. Don't do that. As Joie said, as Deja said, go, I love that middle name of yours, by the way. Go get yourself a documentation journal. You can either get one from me, you can get one wherever you get one. Document your workplace from the first day. I tell people this all the time. Don't wait till something goes wrong. Keep a running tally of what is happening at work. Your one-to-ones to your manager, your conversations with your coworkers. You don't have to do it every day. You can do it at the end of each week. But have a running documentation of your work environment so that when something does go awry, it's very clear where the craziness began. And you can show the difference between when everything was fine and when everything stopped being fine, if you were keeping a record all along. It is like the number one thing that you can do as an employee to protect yourself that most employees do not do, right?
Absolutely.
So it's not about being paranoid, because for those of us who are Black women, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. So, and it's not a matter of just a matter of when, it's a matter of how many times it's going to happen to you while you're working. Yeah. So you have got to make a habit out of documenting things, and also understanding that, what the organization says in its policies and procedures matters. And so if an organization says it has certain values, but it's not reflecting its values and its behavior, again, documenting and holding that up to them when there's a problem and saying, this is what you said, and this is what you're doing. And this is the difference between what you said and what you're doing. And that helps a lot if you are keeping track of, what does the DEI statement say? I help people use those things against their employer. So it's important for you to be an aware employee, an educated employee, and an employee that understands that your number one advocate is you. Having a mentor is great. Having people that support you is very important, because when problems come, being able to go to those people and talk to them and get their advice, and then document what they said and what they said they would do is very helpful. But your number one advocate is you.
It's you.
The
treat
number one
workplace like
attitude.
you're going behind enemy lines. That's the way I see it.
Yes.
Every
You
time.
treat your workplace like you're going behind enemy lines, especially if you're a Black person. And if you treat it that way, you'll be very careful about how you speak, what you say, how you allow people to speak, what you document, what you write down, what you do. Like it's enemy lines for Black people. It really is. And I try to tell Black people this all the time. You know, like when I meet with clients, I'm like, your workplace is an enemy line for Black people. You know, some people get offended by that, but I'm here to tell you the truth. Yeah. Like Black people don't feel safe in workplaces. And I don't care what your survey tells you. If you have a majority Black company, throw that survey in the garbage.
Mm-hmm. Because they're not going to tell you the truth on the survey.
Nothing they told you was true.
Because they know the survey is not confidential, and they know that nothing is going to happen after the survey. So they're not going to tell you the truth. But the other thing is that I think that for us as Black people, and this is something that comes up a lot with my clients, is especially as Black women, but Black people generally, capitalism has done a number on us in addition to white supremacy. And a lot of us really derive our self-worth from the job that we have and the things that we acquire as a result of that job. And having to come face to face that in 2023, that people will still treat you differently and discriminate against you just because of the color of your skin is a very hard thing for people to come to grips with. And I have people come to me and they say, you know, I'm having this problem at work and, you know, my manager, but, you know, and I'll ask them, do you think you're being subject to discrimination? And they'll say no. And then I'll have to point out to them all the things they just told me on their intake form and inform them. In fact, I think this is happening, and I think it's happening to you because you're Black, because you just told me no one else on your team is Black and they're having a different experience from you. Why do you think that really is? And it's very hard for a lot of us to admit that this is happening to us, even though we got the good degree, we got the nice car, we got the nice Louis Vuitton bag, we got the title. We've got all the accoutrements that should say that we're a first-class citizen, and yet we are not. And it's a really hard thing for us to deal with, you know, and so
I agree.
We believe we've got to just keep going, keep working harder, keep producing more.
Stop making excuses. Stop doing that thing. Yeah. People complain, like this is what I'm saying, Black people, and this is why I say, like, the amount of Black people in DEI gaslighting other Black people is incredible. And to Anne's point, they gaslight each other because they have the master's degrees. They are the senior VP of whatever company, right? And they buy into that whitewash, they pull themselves up by the bootstrap narrative. And so now you Negroes can do the same. Don't try to pull me down. Don't try to make my job harder. Why am I going to put myself out on the limb for y'all? Right? But I've worked really hard. And so this is what happens. And the system was designed to do that, but it's always done that. For us, it's been about race, but in a broader American context, it's always been about class, which is why race has been so important, right? Because rich white people don't give a shit about poor white people. They care about us anyway, right? So when you have class dynamics, right, then race. So to Anne's point, when you got Black people who seem to have made it, they got the degrees, they got the home, they live in the neighborhood, right? And just think about, and for Black people, what making it means. It means I moved into a white neighborhood. It means my kids go to white schools. You know, like all of the things that is so about it, right? And so to Anne's point, I think Black people who are successful struggle with the idea that they've done everything white people told them to do, and white people are still treating them like shit.
That's the thing. That's it right there. That's it right there. That's it right there. And
which is why I'm never impressed by Black people when they start telling me about their degrees and their this and their that. And I'm like, baby, do you understand that means really that flex nothing. Is for Black people. That flex ain't for white people. And we all know that, right? When you tell me about your 2 masters and your 3 masters, you're flexing on me as another Black person. Because I know, and you know, in corporate America, it don't mean anything. Because the person who will be your boss is the white guy with the high school diploma.
Hello.
It's managing you with your PhD. So I know, you know, it doesn't mean anything but to other Black people. And I talk about like how Black people, we stunt on each other with respectability politics. Like all of this stuff is to stunt on other Black people. Because if you are a Black professional in the workplace, everybody knows we've all had to report to a manager, even if they had a degree that we know mommy or daddy bought, because their level of intelligence was so minuscule. You would be like, how did this person get this job? Because it doesn't matter in corporate America. So when you're the Black person that's done everything that white people told you to do, when you've carried water for white people, and then you're finally in the position that says, I have arrived, and you're sitting across from Anne, and Anne is telling you what you're experiencing is discrimination, the cognitive dissonance of Black people is just as strong as it is for white people.
I have had people break down and weep at the reality of what I'm saying to them, right? Because they want it to be anything but that is just a hostile work environment. I'm like, well, is everybody else being treated this way? No. Then it's not just a hostile work environment. They're doing this to you because you are you, right? And it's a very hard thing, but at the end of the day, for me, all roads lead to white supremacy, as I always say. And it's all fruit of the white supremacy tree. And so we have to understand as Black people that we are inside of a system that was never created for us to succeed, that was never created for us to be equal, and that is constantly evolving to ensure that we never will be. Right. And all the cars and the bags and all those things doesn't change that reality. And I think it's, people know I love to talk about Paul Mooney. The late Paul Mooney would always say, every Black person will get the nigga wake up call. At some point, you get your nigga wake up call and you realize that all the things that you thought were going to make you different than the rest of them, because that's when Tammy's talking about how some of us want to stunt on each other, that's what it is. We want to feel like we're the good Negro. We're the magical Negro. And therefore we're going to get treated differently than all the other Black people in the office. And that's never going to be the case, right? And so you get your wake up call and you realize that you got to go talk to me or Tammy or Deja, because it's not exactly what you thought it was going to be. And for me, it's like people come to me and they haven't done anything because they weren't expecting it. And so I want us to be ready. For
I
these
send about 2 or 3 TikToks to you every day. Honest to God, I send people. People will get in my inbox and say, and I said, you need to go to the I'm not even BSing you. I send, if you come into my TikTok inbox, I will get these questions, and they'll say, the DEI person didn't work. Oh my God, I wish you could be my DEI person. I said, your company would never hire me because I'm the realest DEI person they would have.
They don't want that.
So they would never hire me. I said, so they wouldn't hire me. So I would never be your DEI person. I said, and they said, well, do you know of an attorney? Do you know somebody who can help me? And I promise you, I'd be like, you need to go to Anne. Tell Anne Tammy sent you. The anti-HR lady, I said, she can help you navigate if you're trying to get out. And when Black people wake up to that reality, like you said, Anne, it is hard for them.
I'm doing therapist referrals now because it's rough. Because these things have an impact on, the way people come home and relate to their families, to their children. It's not something that you can just always leave, right? Because we define ourselves so much by the good job that we got, right? And a nice paycheck and a nice house. And when that is under threat, and it's under threat for something that you have no control over whatsoever, you know what I'm saying? Because racism is white people's disease. It is not ours. But we still have to deal with the effects of their disease every single day. But it's their disease, and we can't heal them from it. Right?
And I've been there, so I know
you're dealing with something you have no control over whatsoever, and you want it to be anything but what you actually know that it is. And when some people have to come to grips with the reality of what that is, it's very hard. Right? It's very hard because we define ourselves by this. And we've been sold this whole thing about America and the American dream and the da-da-da-da-da.
You gotta be asleep to believe it. That's why it's a dream.
That's what George Carlin said. It's a dream because you have to be asleep to believe it. Right? And so I'm just, I woke up to that a long time ago, but some of us never do. And because it requires that you do something. When you are awake, being awake requires action, which is why certain sectors of America are so against people being awake. Somebody accuses me of being woke. I'm like, yes, I am. I'm woke as fuck. Okay.
Yeah, and why are you so asleep?
Because being awake requires action. Only people who are asleep don't act, right? And when you really understand, you have to do something. Yeah. And so the part of the whole system is to keep as many people as possible asleep.
Yep.
And we are lulled to sleep as Black people with things.
With things, capitalism,
and the acquisition of things, and that was one of the things I had to release myself from.
Well, that and religion.
Yeah,
can we talk about that?
Don't get me started on religion.
We don't talk about religion on another conversation. That would be another hour.
Because you know what I say, Ann. I said religion is the thing that controls our mind, and capitalism controls our behavior.
Yes, and it's true. I mean, religion was the thing they used to keep the slaves in line. To keep the slaves in line.
The whole thing. But, oh my goodness!
If I start talking about religion, that'll be another hour conversation. But we can have a great conversation about how this.
We're gonna have to come back to that, Ann. I expect an invite back.
Tammy and I have very similar backgrounds, religious wise, so we could talk forever about that, right? But it's a hard reality. But I feel like just as I said, it's their disease. But if we are to survive and to thrive, we have to understand how to face these things. And so to deal with these things, you have to actually see them as a reality, right? And so that you can act in ways that are to your benefit. And so a lot of what I do, and I know you guys do, is helping people to see these things, because you can't address something that you refuse to see. You know what I'm saying? And a lot of us do not want to see it. But it's extremely important that we do, because once you do, and once you're awake, then you can act, then you can take action. So thank you, all of you. I would like, before we close this up, I would like you guys to share with us, like, what are you guys up to? I know Tammy has her Unleashing Empathy program, and I want her to talk a little bit more about that and how people can participate. But Deja, I'd love for you to also share with my audience, like what you're up to, what you're doing, so that people can reach out to you and work with you if that's what they'd like to do. So Tammy, tell us about Unleashing. Oh, no, sorry, Deja. Tell us about what you're up to. And then Tammy, you can talk to us about Unleashing Empathy.
So Millsec went through like a small rebrand. And what I've been doing now, because what I've seen is that people don't understand military culture, and they don't understand how anti-Blackness has actually had its roots in the military culture, and what's been going on, and like the back scenes, and how it's actually just like not worked for Black people, and why more Black people are like, nah, we're not going to do that. We're okay, thanks, Uncle Sam, but no thanks. Like, the benefits are not worth it. And they have this whole thing with recruitment and yada yada. And I'm talking to people, because people that are, especially those that are in the DEI space, they don't see how a lot of it is connected and interconnected. And looking at how to understand that the military community is so different and so vast and expands throughout the entire world. But at the same time, there's a lot of people who don't understand what that intersectionality looks like. And so I'm really trying to help people to understand why we need to look at the military from an area of race and what that looks like and how those experiences are different. I shared a link with someone that was called Always a Soldier, Incidentally a Negro, or something like that. And they read the article and they were like, I didn't even know that this was a thing that was going on. I didn't know that in World War II, they didn't have access, after that, like when the first GI Bill happened, they didn't have access to these benefits. And this perpetuated all of the lack of generational wealth that's going on now. Wow. And so a lot for me is giving people that education and that background, so that when they're working in the veteran space and the military space with military families, they understand what's going on. They understand that people that PCS to England, like I did, may very much face racism and need to be PCS back in 6 months because they almost died because of the NHS. Like, there's things that I don't think people understand on the military side because they're not involved in it. And if you're not involved in it, you're not going to know. So that's a lot of what I'm doing right now, is giving people that understanding of what that intersectionality looks like for the military community when it comes to race and race-based issues.
So if someone, I want to get a better understanding of who your ideal client and customer is. If someone is interested in working on improving DEI in the military, can they work with you?
Absolutely. I would say
Okay.
for the military, if they're working with veteran service organizations, if they're at the VA, if they're working in the military space would be incredibly helpful, but also if they're working in DEI and they don't know how to integrate the military community into their DEI efforts. I think that would be another way to be able to work with me as well.
Great. And I will have Deja's contact information in the description of this video. So if you are in the military and you want to help the military be better for people of color, especially Black people, you need to reach out to her. You need to work with her. So Tammy, tell us a little bit about what you're up to right now.
So what I've been doing for the past 3 months is a series of masterclasses called Unleash Empathy. And in those masterclasses, we deal specifically with whiteness and white supremacy and the void of empathy that lies in it. Most of the students that come into our classes are white students, but we do encourage Black people to come into those classes as well, because a little bit about what we talked about, Anne, is how Black people have turned themselves into pretzels and knots to fit into white supremacy, and they don't understand how in doing that, empathy is being removed from them as well. And also priming us for the conversation, because I often ask Black people, for the white folks who are coming into this work in earnest, right? And we know a lot of them are not, but for the ones who are coming in earnest in doing their work, what they need to meet on the other side of that from the Black and brown community is a community that's empathetic to the work that they're doing, because both people need this to heal. So one group can't be doing the work and the other one is saying, well, I don't care about you doing that work, right? So but we definitely cultivate spaces where Black people learn and heal differently than white people are. So right now these classes are not combined, because for the Black people that do need to, like Anne says, wake up to this reality, they don't need to be unpacking that in white spaces. So the classes are for white people, and there's just white people in those classes, and then Black people who come into those classes, we do classes for them separately, but all of us need this empathy inside all of us. One, to meet each other when we are doing this work, and to start doing this work. So you can go to unleashempathy.com. There's a schedule of all the classes that we are offering throughout the year. You can find me on TikTok. I go by My Style File. I know it has something to do with what I'm doing, but I started TikTok.
Oh, it's a fun TikTok, you guys. If you are not following Tammy on TikTok, you are missing out big time. I'm learning how to do my makeup better. I'm learning all kinds of things. Okay, you need to be following Tammy on TikTok.
So yeah, my TikTok is My Style File, so you can follow me there. And then on LinkedIn, I'm Tammy Triolo. But yeah, you can follow me on LinkedIn, TikTok, and you can go to unleashempathy.com to learn about what we're doing in the master classes. There's a lot of information there.
Thank you,
I think it's really amazing that you looked at the removal of empathy from Black individuals. I've never thought about it from that perspective. That is fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, that's what proximity does, though. That's what proximity does. Because
and
you
like,
can, and where you more, and you begin to relate more to your oppressor than your own people.
Yes.
That's what happens. And that's what allows us, some of us, to do the things that we do in the workplace.
Yeah.
Right? So I think it's really important that you're doing work with Black people as well, because, you know, we need to unpack that too. Because as I said, all of us are not at the place that we can see. You know what I mean? See those things.
Yeah.
And so, you know, doing some work to figure out, like, why is it that I did that to that person? Because you think back and you realize that you did certain things, especially in a leadership position. And it's like, why did you do that? Right? Because proximity can result in the same illness, you know, in the same disease as it often does. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And we want them to unpack that. We want them to unpack that in a space that's safe for them, right? Because they're going to come into a space of feeling shame. And you don't need to be doing that with other white folks, right? Like, because you already know what you have perpetuated, right, in the workplace. And there's a lot of Black people perpetuating harm in the workplace, because to Anne's point, when you try to get close to whiteness, you have to act and perform the way whiteness requires you to do. And one of the biggest ways it requires you to do is remove empathy from yourself.
And I mean, we're supposed to be closing up, but I got to throw one more thing out. Wouldn't you say, though, that you just talked about guilt, and it's true. But I think guilt is one of the driving things with white people as well. They don't want to feel guilt about
Yes.
about
Or
their
shame.
the legacy. And you have to, I think the world would be a better place if white people could get up every morning and look in the mirror and say, my name is Brad and I'm a racist, like they tell alcoholics to do. Right?
Listen,
because if you could do that and then you engage in the actions that
and then you can move from that,
engage in and move on from that. But this desire to not admit that they are racist, how could you not be? The system demands it of you. How could
that
you
is our classes.
That is the biggest problem. It's like
that is our classes.
Admit it and then move on and do the work. But they fight against that idea. Everything that's happening right now in the country is about the fight against that idea, right? And also about the fight to keep Black people where they believe that we belong, right?
I will tell you, when students come in to the class, and that first master class, it's a, it hits them. And I say to them, I said, here's why y'all have to get comfortable with the idea that you are in fact racist, because you couldn't be any other way. Yeah. The system wouldn't design you. You would be a miracle. Like it would be a miracle, a Christmas miracle, that you as a white person would be walking around America not a racist, when the system has made so much investment for you to be. And so when we talk about the different ways the system has invested in them to be racist, it clicks for them. It clicks, and then they can start. And then they get stuck. And I said, you're going to feel shame, but you got to move through that quickly, because shame will stop you from doing your work. Right. Yeah. But I said, but here's where you replace shame. You replace shame with empathy for yourself. Right. Because I didn't choose Christianity. My parents indoctrinated me in it. Exactly. Yep. I didn't have a choice, no more than you chose white supremacy. Your parents, society, and the country indoctrinated you in it. Yep. Right. Absolutely. I said, so because I walk around, I give myself empathy about being one of those Christians that was just judgmental to the hilt. Right. But now that I'm undoing that, I have empathy for myself, because I didn't choose that. I didn't give that to myself. That was given to me. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so this is why we said, you can't, when I say this to people, I'm going to die on this hill. You cannot do this work without empathy, because people have to give empathy for themselves and saying, all the shit I got, I didn't have a choice in getting the shit I got. But you have a choice to change it. And changing what I got. And so while I'm sitting in shame when I messed up or did something wrong, move out of shame, get into empathy. Give yourself grace, give yourself empathy, correct that shit, get up and move to the next thing. I can't even add anything to that. That's the thing. I mean, I think that if we could like clone the two of you and just spread you out into the universe. I mean, that's the thing, it's, I think if people can just admit none of us are perfect, and there is a system around all of this, and the system is operating as it was designed. And I say that all the time when people are like, oh, the system is broken. I'm like, it ain't broken. It's not broken. It's working the way it's supposed to work. It's working the way it was designed to work. It's not broken. If we want to fix it, we have to break it. But we have to break it. We have to break it, but we can't. It's not broken. It's operating as it was designed. And so, in all of our work in our different ways, we're all trying to break it somehow. Trying to break it somehow. But that's what collectively all of us who want a better world and a better society have to be willing to break the wheel, as my favorite person on Game of Thrones said. Right?
I think that's why my kids would not survive in public school. Yeah. My kids would not survive in public school because they are so overly educated in what is wrong. They look at a teacher like, I don't think that's right. Like my son taught his teacher in the UK about Windrush because she didn't know what it was. And he was like, how do you live here? You don't know what it is. And I'm like, son. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, that goes to what I was saying about being awake, right? Yeah. And trying and surviving in a society where you're awake and so many people around you are asleep, right? Yeah. And so you're seen as a problem in institutions, in organizations, in the world, the larger world, when you are someone who actually has a certain level of awareness. And so I think the best that we can do is to try to educate more people so that they can be aware, and especially employees. I think especially people of color, we have these ideas that we were taught by capitalism, that HR is your friend, and the company is just work hard and all the good things will happen. And it's really hard for people when they realize that that's a lie, because it's not working out that way for them, right? But it's not working out that way for anybody. It's just something that you were told, but it's not working out that way for anybody. And so I thank both of you for taking the time to talk to me. This was a lot of fun. We have to do it again. We are definitely going to have a conversation about religion.
That'd be fun. That's going to be fun.
It's going to piss a lot of Black people off, but I think it's a conversation that needs to be had. But thank you guys for being here. I want to remind people about how to ask for an exit from discriminatory hostile work environment with cash and actually get it. The group masterclass will open up for registration soon. So make sure you subscribe to my website, get on the wait list, because priority will go to the people who sign up on the wait list for early registration notification. And keep following me here at the Anti-HR HR Lady. I'm Anne Marie, and as I always say, HR is not your enemy, but they're definitely not your friend. But I am. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.